Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into a muddy medieval village where justice isn't blind, it's just kind of drunk, superstitious, and maybe a little hungry. The streets smell like wet hay and boiled cabbage, a scent you'll grow to hate. You're squinting against the low torchlight, trying to make sense of the crowd that's forming near the market square. There's shouting, there's cheering, there's something suspiciously slimy sliding down your boot. You're not sure if it's sewage or soup, and frankly you're afraid to ask. This, my friend, is justice in the Middle Ages. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, nudging aside a chicken and a child who appears to be chewing on a leather strap. At the center of the crowd stands a man accused of stealing cheese. Not gold, not jewels. Cheese. Two moldy, pungent wheels of it, which around here might as well be treasure. In the year 1273, cheese was serious business. In fact, any food was. With no refrigeration and questionable hygiene, anything edible had value. Cheese, with its long shelf life and belly-filling power, often stood in for currency. So stealing it, practically treason. The village elder, who doubles as the judge, raises a trembling hand to silence the crowd. He's about 97 and has a beard that could trap small birds. "Let the trial commence," he croaks. You brace for something official. Maybe some parchment, a gavel, a somber tone. But no. Instead, two burly men bring out a balance scale. On one side, the cheese. On the other, a rock. Apparently, if the cheese outweighs the stone, the man is guilty. Why don't ask? Even back then, no one really knew. Historians still argue whether these tests were symbolic, spiritual, or just plain bizarre. Shockingly, the cheese sinks low. The crowd gasps. The accused swears he didn't do it. He even starts crying, which earns a few sneers. Only the guilty weep, someone shouts. You suspect that person just likes shouting things. The punishment. He must publicly apologize to each member of the village. There are 113 of them, while kneeling and wearing a garland of spoiled onions. Oh, and he's banned from cheese for 6 months. That last bit really hits him hard. As you follow the weeping man down the dirt road, you start to understand something crucial about medieval justice. It wasn't about fairness. It was about making a scene, a performance, a group therapy session with vegetables and humiliation. Next, you pass by a wooden post where another man is being pelted with stale bread. His crime, saying the Lord's sheep looked a bit too French, an insult apparently, and possibly treasonous. There's a law, very real, that prohibits slandering noble livestock. But don't worry, it gets worse. You turn the corner and find a woman tied to a post surrounded by herbs. Not as a punishment. She's the local healer. People think she might be a witch, but they also need her for foot fungus and mysterious rashes. So she's allowed to live barely so long as she doesn't heal anyone too well. This paradox follows you through the town. Laws contradict each other. Offenses range from bizarre to imaginary. Did you know in some places it was illegal to eat eels on Wednesdays unless the moon was waxing? You didn't. Neither did the guy who's now scrubbing latrines for breaking that exact law. As night falls, you sit on a bale of damp hay outside the tavern, listening to a drunk man explain how he once got fined for looking at a priest sideways. You smile, thinking he's joking. He is not. The fine was 3 eggs and a length of rope. Even worse, he got off light. Another man once had to carry a live goat through town while singing psalms in falsetto, all because he sneezed during mass. Historians still argue whether these punishments were meant to deter or simply entertain the masses. You lean toward the latter. Back in the square, the elder is napping in his chair. Justice pauses when he does. A dog urinates on the scales. No one seems to mind. You stretch your legs and walk toward the outskirts where a small chapel sits crookedly under a wilting tree. Inside, a monk is scribbling trial notes onto sheepskin parchment. You peek over his shoulder and see he's written, "Accused smelled of onions and despair." He underlines despair. There's something oddly modern about his tone. Dry, a bit sarcastic. You imagine if medieval TikTok existed, this guy would be huge. Outside a bell rings. Another trial. This one for someone accused of summoning wind during a sermon. Not a ghostly wind, just wind. The implication is biological. You grimace. The defendant is forced to hold a candle. If the flame stays steady, he's innocent. If it flickers, he's guilty. It flickers, probably because they're standing outside. But logic isn't part of the equation. The crowd boos, someone throws a radish. As the accused runs away in shame, you realize medieval justice was less about truth and more about vibes. If people didn't like you, your odds weren't great. But if you were popular, charming, or could juggle, you might just walk free. Remember the cheese thief? You spot him now, onion garlands sagging, kneeling before a goat. "I'm sorry, noble creature," he whispers. The goat blinks. Acceptance, perhaps. The moon rises. The village quiets. But you, weary traveller, are just beginning your strange journey through history's oddest courtroom. You wake up to the clanging of a bell, not the soft kind that gently calls you to breakfast, but the panicked kind that suggests someone's about to be dunked in a freezing river for crimes they probably didn't commit. You rub your eyes. It's dawn. A rooster screams its judgmental cry across the village rooftops. You shuffle toward the square again, yawning. This time there's a bigger crowd, more excited, murmuring, and most importantly, a wooden seesaw-looking contraption balanced over the river. Welcome to the trial by ducking. Your eyes widen as you see a woman being tied to the end of a long wooden plank. She's accused of being a witch. The method of testing: dunk her into the river and see if she floats. If she sinks, she's innocent, but unfortunately dead. If she floats, she's guilty and probably doomed anyway. It's the kind of lose-lose logic only medieval minds could cook up before breakfast. You shift uncomfortably as they lower her into the water. The crowd leans forward. There are no lawyers here, no evidence, just a dunk tank of doom. The woman holds her breath. Bubbles rise and then pop. She surfaces. The crowd gasps. A few shout, "Witch!" Someone throws a handful of goose feathers. You don't ask why. There are no explanations here, only tradition. Historians still argue whether these water ordeals were sincerely believed or just crowd-pleasing theatrics. Some say the tests were designed to scare, not kill. Others suggest it was about giving a community a sense of control in a world with far too little of it. Whatever the reason, it's not the only strange legal case today. A bell rings from the opposite end of the village. You wander over and find a trial already in session. The accused, a pig. Yes, a pig. Apparently, it bit a child. The parents are sobbing. The pig is asleep. The court proceedings are serious. The pig is dressed in a tiny vest. There's a scribe recording everything with a solemn expression. The charges: assault, attempted murder, and disrespecting the Lord's land. You wonder how one disrespectfully eats grass. Still, pig trials were a real thing. There's a documented case in 1386 where a sow in France was dressed in human clothes, tried in court, and hanged for killing a child. Someone even made it wear pants. No one explained why. Possibly modesty. You stare at the pig, who now seems vaguely aware something is wrong. It snorts and scratches itself. The judge, who also sells fish on Thursdays, rules that the pig is guilty. It'll be punished according to custom. This probably means hanging or exile. Yes, pigs were exiled, sent to other villages with stern warnings. You imagine one pig showing up being like, "Hey, I bit a guy, but I've changed," and getting chased off with brooms. The villagers go back to their homes satisfied. Justice, such as it is, has been served. As you stroll toward the edge of town, you pass a boy sweeping the path with a tree branch. He looks up and says, "Don't step on the toad rocks." You look down, just some stones. They ward off evil eyes, he adds seriously. Superstition is justice's invisible partner here. From river ducking to pig trials to sacred rocks, medieval people rarely saw things as random. If something bad happened, someone or something had to be blamed, and sometimes that someone was an animal or an inanimate object. There are stories of roosters being tried for laying eggs, cats exiled for being too sneaky. Even a door was once fined for falling on a merchant. The logic being, everything has a role in God's order, so if you disrupt that, you pay. You pass a wooden pole with dozens of trinkets hanging from it, amulets, dried herbs, bundles of wool, even a spoon. This is the mercy post. Accused people would touch it while confessing in hopes of leniency. It's kind of like rubbing a lucky rabbit's foot, but for not getting executed. Suddenly you hear arguing nearby. A merchant is accusing a neighbor of cursing his apples. He claims his fruit now tastes angrier. The accused woman insists she just moved her laundry line. The village elder agrees to resolve the matter by having both of them walk in circles while holding the apples. If one drops their fruit, they're guilty. This is real justice, medieval style, equal parts improv, superstition, and communal peer pressure. Some historians believe these oddities served a social purpose, keeping people in line through spectacle and collective embarrassment. Others think it was just a practical way to distract folks from the crushing monotony of subsistence living. Bread and circuses, but with turnips and public humiliation. Later, you find yourself in a smaller clearing where a teenage boy is on trial for mocking a crow. Yes, that's the charge. Apparently, the crow belonged to the priest. The boy mimicked its squawk during Mass, which the priest took personally. The punishment. He must now care for the crow for one full season and recite a morning prayer with it. You watch him now glaring at the bird as it pecks his boot. The bird seems smug. The priest looks triumphant. You just sigh. The further you go, the more surreal it becomes. An old woman is being fined for walking backward during a harvest. Disturbs the barley spirits, explains a man in a burlap hat. You nod politely. Everyone around you nods too. You're not sure if they believe it, or if they're just used to nodding to avoid suspicion. Because here's the truth, everyone's afraid of becoming the next trial. So they smile, nod, and point at the witch before anyone points at them. The sun dips low again, casting long shadows across crooked rooftops and uneven fences. Somewhere in the distance, someone is banging a pot. That's the sound of a shame parade. You'll see it tomorrow. For now, you sit on a stump watching the last of the pig trial's audience shuffle home. The pig pardoned, actually. Turns out it was the wrong pig. They all kind of look alike. The judge said something about divine signs and let it go. You swear the pig smirked at you as it waddled past. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but it's hard. Because here, even your dreams might be a crime if you snore during the wrong moon phase. You wake to the sound of chanting. Low and slow, it creeps through the fog, like something out of a fever dream. The sun hasn't risen yet, just a grey haze curling over the village rooftops. The air smells like wet wood and burning rosemary. Someone nearby mutters a prayer under their breath. You follow the murmurs to the church courtyard where a fire pit has been lit, and 3 men in hooded robes stand in a circle around a cauldron the size of a wine barrel. Another trial, someone whispers beside you. This one's the boiling ordeal. Your stomach turns a little. You don't like where this is going, and not just because someone's cooking breakfast next to the cauldron and the smells are blending weirdly. The accused this time is a blacksmith's apprentice. He's accused of stealing a silver ring from the local reeve. There's no proof, but someone saw him glancing at it last week, and well, that's good enough for suspicion. The test. He must plunge his hand into the cauldron and retrieve a small iron ball from the bottom. If his wounds heal cleanly after 3 days, he's innocent. If they fester or scar, he's guilty. You probably won't survive this, you think, on his behalf. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were genuinely meant to reveal truth or just scare people into confessions. Some accounts claim priests would rig the ordeal to protect the innocent, or at least those with friends in the right places. Today it's not rigged. You watch as the apprentice stares into the roiling water steam fogging his face. He says a quiet prayer, then plunges his hand in. The scream he releases is short, sharp, and awful. He pulls it out seconds later, clutching the iron ball, shaking violently. No one cheers, not even the accuser. This kind of justice doesn't leave anyone feeling good. The priest wraps the boy's hand in linen and mutters a few Latin phrases. "We'll check it in 3 days," he says. "God will reveal the truth." You doubt the boy will be able to hold a hammer again. As the crowd disperses, you drift along the edge of the churchyard, past the now quiet cauldron, steam still drifting like ghosts. You wonder what kind of logic held all this together. And then you hear it. God knows, man does not. It's the priest again, brushing soot from his hands. That's how we keep order. We can't know what's in someone's heart, but maybe God shows us through firewater wounds. You try to argue silently in your head. What about fairness? What about evidence? But in a world without fingerprints, DNA, or even reliable lighting, people reached for what they had: fear, faith, and the occasional boiling cauldron. Later that afternoon, you see another ordeal take place, this one with a glowing iron rod. A woman accused of poisoning a pie must carry it 3 paces, and then have her palm bandaged. Same rule, if it heals without infection, she's free. Spoiler, it doesn't. The pie, by the way, was just undercooked. In some places, people believed the fire wouldn't burn an innocent soul. That divine intervention would literally shield them. There's even an account of someone walking through fire unharmed, or so the scribes claimed. Historians still argue whether those moments were miraculous or more likely dramatic exaggerations meant to reinforce belief in the system. As night falls, the apprentice's moans echo faintly through the streets. His family huddles near the forge, whispering prayers. You pass silently, unsure if he's lucky or doomed. Down a side alley, you hear children mimicking the ordeal. One pretends to dip a stick into an imaginary cauldron, while another declares, "You are guilty of stealing the moon." They all laugh. Even the kids know it's nonsense, but they play it anyway. The next morning, you catch sight of another bizarre justice ritual, the ordeal of the cross. 2 people with a dispute, usually land or money, stand in front of a crucifix and hold out their arms straight and wide. The one who lowers their arms first is guilty. Today's competitors are 2 old men arguing over a goat's grazing route. One of them is wearing a beetle necklace for luck. They stand arms stretched, trembling. People place bets. One child starts chanting left guy, like it's a sports match. 10 minutes in, the right guy starts wobbling. He drops. That's it, the village elder says. Goat goes left. You blink. That's it. That's the verdict based on who has better arm strength, apparently so. It's hard not to laugh, or cry, maybe both. The oddest part, no one seems outraged. They trust this. Or maybe they're just too tired to question it. Life is hard enough without turning against the only system you've got, even if it runs on fire fatigue and very literal witch hunts. You wander into the woods for a break and stumble upon a small shrine with a rusted bell. It's the confession tree. People tie ribbons to its branches when they lie in court, hoping to be forgiven before their lies catch up with them. A few are fresh. You tie one on too. You're not guilty of anything, but something about the system makes you feel like maybe you are. That night you find shelter in the abandoned home of a former village judge. His journal lies on the table, its pages curled with time and damp. One entry reads, "I do not always believe what we do is right, but I believe it stops worse things from happening. If they see fairness, even fake fairness, they are less likely to riot." You sit with that for a while. Justice here isn't about truth. It's about stability. Not finding the real thief, but stopping a mob. Not uncovering lies, but soothing them. Still, it's hard to rest knowing that the boy with the burned hand has 3 days to wait for judgment. Not from men, but from the blisters that bubble beneath his skin. You close your eyes. The world fades to the crackle of coals, and somewhere far off, another cauldron is warming. The sky is barely lit when you're woken again, this time by hooves. Horses, lots of them. Not the heavy war horses of noble knights, but the lean, shaggy ones of messengers and officials. You hear a horn sharp and urgent, and the whole village seems to inhale at once. "The bailiffs come," someone mutters. You yawn, wrap yourself tighter in your cloak, and step into the morning mist. There's a stir in the square. A man wearing a heavy leather tabard and a purse of wax seals on his belt is dismounting. He carries a scroll thicker than a loaf of rye bread. His hat is large and absurdly feathered, which you guess means he's important. He's here to read the royal writs, announce punishments, and most critically collect fines. You stand at the edge of the crowd squinting as the scroll is unrolled. A scribe follows beside him, like a shadow ready to record who gasps, who winces, and who tries to sneak away. The bailiff begins. By order of his grace, the king's law extends now too. You zone out. His voice drones like a bee trapped in a jug. What matters is this: the king's justice, though distant, casts a long shadow. Until now, you've mostly seen local trials, rough homegrown justice, served with torches and rumors. But now the bureaucracy arrives, and with it, fees. Lots of fees. A man is fined for using the Lord's forest paths without permission. Another for letting his pigs eat acorns meant for noble hogs. A third is charged with reckless oat spillage, which sounds made up, but apparently involves knocking over a cart at market and causing a priest's mule to panic. You learn that nearly everything has a price. Can't pay, you'll owe a favor, or goods, or possibly your own labor. That's how justice works here. Crime turns into coin, and coin is always owed upward. Historians still debate whether royal justice was actually meant to protect peasants, or simply extract wealth more efficiently. Some say it offered consistency and reduced mob punishments. Others argue it just shifted power away from communities and into the coffers of the crown. Either way, you watch one woman cry as she hands over a sack of barley, muttering that now she won't eat until Sunday. There's a bright spot in the misery. A traveling partner has tagged along with the bailiff. He sells indulgences, sheets of paper that allegedly forgive sins. For a fee, of course. You sidle up out of curiosity. He's got a wooden crate full of colourful scrolls, each stamped with a wax seal and a vaguely holy-looking sketch. They're priced by sin. Theft, 2 pence. Adultery, 5. Thinking lustful thoughts. 1 farthing per thought, though he admits he doesn't have a way to count them. A teenage boy nearby is calculating how many farthings he can spare. You don't ask. Then the pardoner announces a special 10 sins for the price of 8. A crowd gathers. Business is brisk. You realize something important here. The boundary between justice and salvation is blurred. Whether it's coins for court or coins for heaven, the real verdict seems to come from your wallet. The bailiff finally finishes his proclamations and posts the new taxes on a board near the well. As people disperse, you sneak a peek. Among the offences now taxable, owning more than 3 hens without lordly permission, building a fence taller than a man's reach, singing bawdy songs within earshot of the church. You hum quietly just in case. At midday, you follow the bailiff and his entourage as they head to the edge of the village. They're visiting the stocks. Ah yes, the stocks. Medieval justice's most iconic furniture. 2 planks of wood with holes for your limbs, and a very public audience. A baker sits there now, head and hands poking through. His crime-selling underweight loaves. The bread-cheat kids call him, pelting him with cabbage leaves. One little girl brings a turnip with a face drawn on it, which somehow feels worse. He's been there since morning. The real punishment isn't the discomfort, it's the shame. He looks utterly crushed. You sit on a low wall watching. There's no trial here, just the bailiff's judgment and a plank of wood. This is swift, humiliating justice, and it's effective at least by medieval standards. Nobody wants to be the turnip target. Oddly enough, historians still debate the fairness of stocks. Some argue they were relatively humane, a short-term punishment with no lasting damage. Others point out the psychological harm and the way it reinforced social hierarchies. After all, nobles were rarely stock-bound. You walk past another punishment post, this one called a cucking stool, a sort of dunking chair reserved mostly for scolds, usually outspoken women. The device is currently unoccupied, but a few boys are testing it out, swinging each other over a stream until one falls in and shouts, "I repent." There's always a show, even when no one's watching. By late afternoon, the village is quiet again. The bailiff has moved on, the pardoner is counting coins, and the baker has been released. He sits on a stool, brushing cabbage bits from his hair. You wander to the edge of town and find a small bench beneath a willow tree. An old man sits there carving notches into a stick. Keeping track, he mutters when you ask, "How many times I've seen justice today?" "How many?" He shows you the stick. It's full. You sit beside him. He tells you of a time a nobleman's son ran down a child with a horse. The boy died. No punishment. Different laws, the old man says, shrugging. If you're rich enough, justice forgets your name. That night, as fireflies flicker above the fields, you think about what you've seen, the scrolls, the fines, the scrolls that forgive fines, and the rotten cabbage justice of the stocks. Justice here seems less about fairness and more about form. If there's a ritual, a fee, a proclamation, then the box is checked. Order is maintained. But truth, that's harder to pin down. You drift off under the willow tree, the bailiff's voice still echoing in your dreams somewhere between a threat and a lullaby. You wake to the sound of bells. Not church bells, smaller, faster, with an urgent clatter. You rub your eyes and notice people moving quickly through the village square, some with worried faces, others with excitement. Then you hear the word that chills you a little more than it probably should, witch. Suddenly everyone's an expert. You overhear theories about chickens that stopped laying bread that wouldn't rise and that one cow that looked at me funny before dying. A little girl swears she saw someone flying, which seems bold even for a kid. You follow the crowd to the far end of the village where a woman maybe in her 40s stands tied to a post. Her expression is a strange mix of exhaustion and resignation. She's not screaming, not begging, just waiting. She's accused of hexing a villager's crops and consorting with a demon that took the shape of a one-eyed crow. You try not to laugh at that one, but someone beside you mutters, "That bird's been lurking for weeks." You squint up at a nearby tree. Sure enough, a very normal-looking crow perches there looking bored. The village priest begins a ritual. Salt holy water, mumbled Latin, and a handful of herbs burned in a little dish. The smoke curls around the woman. She sneezes. Someone gasps. That's proof, says a man with unusually thick eyebrows. You're not sure how sneezing became evidence of demonic possession, but the rules are fluid. Historians still argue whether medieval witch trials were widespread or more isolated and hysterical. Some records suggest they were relatively rare before the late Middle Ages. Others argue they were always simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a bad harvest, a sick child, or a neighbor's jealousy to boil over. Today it's boiling. To determine guilt, the villagers opt for a tried and terrible favorite, the water test. The woman is taken to the river. Her hands and feet are bound, and she's gently lowered into the water with a rope. If she floats, she's a witch, someone explains cheerfully. If she sinks, she's innocent. You blink, but if she sinks, she drowns. Well, yes, they say, but she'll go to heaven. You watch in stunned silence as she's submerged. The water ripples. She doesn't float. She also doesn't flail. You wonder if she's just done. They pull her out a few seconds later. She's coughing, sputtering alive. Someone shrugs. Maybe not a witch after all. They leave her lying on the bank while everyone wanders off. No apology, no compensation, just soggy suspicion and a ruined morning. Later, you spot her sitting near a fire wrapped in a blanket. She catches your eye. You expect anger. Instead, she offers a small, bitter smile. "I was the village healer," she says softly, "until I mismeasured a tincture last week. A baby got sick. Now I'm a witch." You sit beside her, unsure what to say. Eventually she adds, "The crow's mine, by the way. His name's Edgar." He calls in the distance as if on cue. In another village not far from here, there's a different kind of justice. You make your way there by sunset, past mossy stone walls and fields of barley. This place has a wise woman who's treated with a strange mix of reverence and suspicion. She's been accused too, not of curses, but of knowing too much, of reading the stars, of speaking Latin, of having gasp books. Books in this world are dangerous things. Not because of their content, though some are quite spicy, but because they imply knowledge beyond your station. And knowledge is power. The wrong kind, anyway. You peek into her cottage. It smells of rosemary ink and something vaguely sulfuric. She's old, bent like a question mark. She tells you they haven't accused me yet, but they're close. All it takes is one cow dying sideways. You nod. Cow position is very important, apparently. You glance at her shelves. There's a book on herb lore, one on dream interpretations, and a badly copied version of Virgil's Aeneid. You wonder if that one's for leisure or spellcrafting. She gives you a sprig of something and tells you to tuck it in your shoe. For protection, she says. from fools. The next morning, you return to the first village where a new drama brews. This time, it's not about witches. It's about fashion. A young woman is accused of wearing shoes above her station. They have embroidery on them, bright, colourful thread. Too nice for someone whose family doesn't own land. How did she afford it, someone demands. Maybe she's got a noble lover, someone else whispers. She's dressing like a temptress. You stare. They're just shoes. But here, appearances are currency. A flash of wealth where there shouldn't be any raises questions. And questions quickly become accusations. They bring her before the manor steward. He's bored but amused. Explain the shoes, he says. Turns out her uncle's a cobbler, gifted them for her birthday. She cries as she explains, but no one seems to care. The steward shrugs. Too fine for your rank. 50 lashes or forfeit the shoes. She takes off the shoes. You later find them discarded near the well. You consider trying them on just to spite the system, but decide against it. You've seen what fashion crimes get you. There's a pattern here. Women, especially those who speak too well, heal too effectively, read too much, or dress too nicely, tend to end up tied to something. Historians still debate whether this reflects broad societal fear or targeted misogyny. Spoiler, it's probably both. That night back under your tree, Edgar the Crow lands nearby. He hops over eyes you curiously and lets out a sound that's halfway between a caw and a sigh. Same, you mutter. The stars overhead flicker like candle flames. You wonder how many others are lying awake under this sky, accused of too much thinking, too much knowing, or simply too much being. You wonder how many were lucky enough to sink. You leave the village behind as morning fog curls through the fields like forgotten dreams. After a day of water trials and stolen shoes, you're craving something, anything more rational. Maybe a proper court. A place where justice isn't measured in vegetables thrown or how damp a woman gets. So you follow the winding road to a nearby town known for its assizes, which is just a fancy word for royal court sessions that roll through every few months like a very stern parade. The kind with scrolls judges and just enough Latin to confuse everybody. The town's already abuzz when you arrive. There's a line outside the hall. Peasants, merchants, even a few nobles with sour expressions and powdered noses. You're herded in by a steward, handed a wooden token, why unclear, and shuffled into the gallery like cattle with better footwear. The courtroom is impressive in a smells like wax and old parchment kind of way. A judge sits high on a dais, wrapped in heavy robes and a perpetual frown. He looks like he was born disapproving of things. Court begins with a flourish of announcements, titles, lineages, a warning that lying will damn your soul and your sheep. The first case involves a man accused of stealing 12 eggs. He claims the eggs were his laid by his chickens and blames a neighbor for egg envy. The neighbor argues the eggs rolled over the fence. Somehow. A clerk presents egg trajectory diagrams scratched onto a wooden board. You stifle a giggle. Eventually, the judge bangs a gavel, well a stick, and declares, "The eggs are of no value now, as they've all been eaten. Let compensation be made in grain." Not exactly law and order, but it'll do. Then comes something more serious, a murder trial. A farmer is accused of killing a traveller on the road after an argument over a donkey. There are no witnesses, just 2 bloody footprints, a broken walking stick, and a really dramatic widow. The defendant claims self-defense. The widow cries. The donkey is brought in for testimony. You watch wide-eyed as a clerk actually presents the donkey to the judge. The judge squints at it like it might blurt out the truth. It just poops on the floor. There's silence. Historians still argue whether animals were truly brought to court as witnesses, or if these records are symbolic, exaggerated, or just clerical pranks. Regardless, this donkey is definitely not talking. Ultimately, the case is decided not on evidence, but compurgation. That's a fancy word for swear you didn't do it and bring friends to back you up. The farmer's pals place their hands on a Bible and say something like, "We believe Bob's not a murderer." Case dismissed. You're stunned. That's it. Someone beside you shrugs. At least it's better than trial by combat. Oh yes, that's a thing. Later that day, in the muddy square outside the hall, you watch an actual trial by combat unfold. 2 men, one wiry one shaped like a barrel, circle each other with wooden staves. The crowd cheers. Someone sells beer. The dispute property boundaries. Apparently, one guy's fence is 1 chicken's length too far west. They brawl badly. It's more slapping and grunting than gladiator glory. Eventually, the rounder one falls landing in a puddle. The other raises his staff in triumph. Just as someone yells, throwing a turnip. And just like that, the property line is decided. Later, you ask a clerk why this is allowed. Because if God wants the innocent to win, he says he'll guide their hand. You glance back at the victor who's currently trying to get mud out of his ear. You have doubts. Trial by combat wasn't always barbaric entertainment. Historians note that it was meant to be sacred an ordeal where divine intervention would reveal truth. Some argue it offered a sort of equality. Even a low-born man could challenge a noble. Others point out that the rich could simply hire better fighters. One noble legend says employed a trained mercenary to duel for him and won a land dispute while sipping wine. You get the sense that combat isn't about truth. It's about confidence and bruises, and maybe whoever's better at falling without breaking anything. That night, you wander through the quieter parts of town. The houses are packed close, the alleys dark and whispery. You stumble into a tavern where people are still debating the egg theft like it's international diplomacy. A bard in the corner is singing a song about a trial where a pig was once sentenced to death for trampling a noble's flowers. The flowers were fine, the bard adds between verses, but the pig's attitude was simply appalling. You smile, though part of you wonders if he's joking. Turns out he's not. Yes, animals could be tried in court. It wasn't common, but when it happened, it was serious business. Pigs, dogs, even roosters were once found guilty of crimes like destruction, aggression, or unholy crowing. Whole trials, full transcripts, with defense lawyers. One infamous case involved a pig that bit off a child's ear. The pig was tried, found guilty, and hanged. Another trial saw a swarm of locusts excommunicated from the church. Historians still puzzle over these episodes. Were they metaphors, legal training exercises, or did medieval folks just have very high expectations for animal behavior? Either way, the bard's song is catchy. You head upstairs to the inn's loft and find a spot on the straw mattress. You can still hear the muffled chorus below. If your goose breaks the rules, then your goose shall be cooked. You close your eyes, head swimming with images swearing neighbors, egg diagrams, donkeys on trial, and turnip-fueled duels. Tomorrow you'll look into something else, what happens when justice isn't blind but drunk. Because rumor has it, the local tithing man solves crimes based on dreams, gossip, and sometimes the position of the moon. But for now, the song below fades. Your straw pillow prickles your cheek. Somewhere a pig dreams of freedom. You wake to the sound of someone shouting, "He's gone and done it again." That's never a good sign. You roll off the straw mattress, stretch your back with an audible crack, and peek out the window. A cluster of villagers is gathered around the stocks near the tavern, pointing and whispering. You throw on your tunic, still musty with the scent of last night's turnip stew, and head down to investigate. There, in all his red-cheeked glory, is the tithing man. He's asleep in the stocks. You blink. Isn't he supposed to be in charge of justice? Justice naps too, someone mumbles behind you. The tithing man stirs, then jolts awake. "I had a vision," he bellows, "and I know who's been stealing the miller's chickens." Everyone leans in. This is the moment. The man who's supposed to uphold peace in this hamlet, who's had a pint too many and straw in his beard, is about to deliver divine insight. "It's the cobbler," he says. "The moon told me," the crowd murmurs. Someone dares to ask, "How exactly did the moon say that?" The tithing man blinks. "It was shaped like a shoe last night." You glance at the moon now, a sliver in the pale morning sky, and try not to laugh. A shoe, really. Yet within the hour, the cobbler's house is searched. No chickens are found, but a suspicious number of feathers are in his yard. "Could be his pillow," someone mutters. "Could be guilt," says the tithing man, solemnly, like he didn't just invent poultry astrology. It's this kind of justice, somewhere between folklore and fermented barley, that defines the lives of thousands across the countryside. The tithing man isn't a judge or a priest. He's more like the head of the neighborhood watch, elected by the people, given minimal training and far too much cider. Tithing men were responsible for reporting crimes, keeping the peace, and ensuring men showed up to court when summoned. In theory. In practice, they were part investigator, part busybody, part amateur weather interpreter. Historians still argue whether they were genuinely respected or tolerated, like that one uncle who insists on doing magic tricks at weddings. Later, You overhear the tithing man interrogating a shepherd boy about some missing firewood. "Did your sheep see anything?" he asks, serious as stone. The boy nods solemnly. One of them said it was the cooper's apprentice. The chatty one, the tithing man nods. You decide to walk, just walk, as far from moonshoes and psychic sheep as your legs will take you. By midday, you find yourself in a forest clearing, shaded and cool. There's a strange quiet here, broken only by birdsong and the rustle of wind through trees. That's when you spot it, a small circle of stones half covered in moss. In the center lies a wooden post, old and cracked. A pillory. You hadn't expected to find one in the middle of nowhere, but here it is, forgotten by time. Probably once dragged out for some poor soul who stole bread or insulted a baron's haircut. You sit on the edge of the pillory and rest your feet. And as you do, you imagine what it must have been like. Public humiliation as punishment. Stocks in the center of town. Crowds jeering. People throwing rotting vegetables. Children poking your knees. All for crimes that today might warrant a fine or a talking to. One record you recall described a man being pilloried for unseemly laughter during a funeral. Another for mocking a priest's stutter. The Middle Ages, where your sense of humor could literally land you in splinters. Suddenly a voice interrupts your thoughts. Careful, that pillory bites. You turn and see an old woman gathering herbs nearby. She nods toward the wood. I saw a man get stuck in one once. Had to be greased out with lard. You nod, half listening, half wondering how much lard that took. She hobbles closer. They used to do more than stocks out here, though. Whispered confessions. Secret meetings. Forest courts. Forest courts, you ask? She nods. When the lords were too far and the law was too slow, they'd gather, swear an oath, and decide justice among themselves. A kind of vigilante system then. Not unlike tithing men, but quieter and perhaps fairer. She shrugs. Some say it worked. Others say people vanished and never came back. Historians still debate whether these Greenwood courts were real or more legend than fact. Some tales speak of outlaw councils, Robin Hood types, dispensing their own justice. Others suggest they were desperation systems, born of too much distance and too little power. The old woman offers you a piece of dried apple, then disappears into the trees. You chew slowly, listening to the silence. By evening, you're back near a hamlet where a different kind of justice is underway. A man stands in the square wearing a large wooden sign around his neck that reads, "I lied about my neighbour's goat." He looks miserable. Shaming punishments were common and creative. Wooden signs, dunce caps, bells tied to ankles. A man once had to walk through town with a chicken tied to his head for claiming his ale had been turned into blood by a rival. You're not sure what's worse, the physical punishment or the endless jokes afterward. Tonight's offender had falsely accused his neighbour of theft to settle a feud. He's been sentenced to wear the sign for 3 days and sleep in the pigsty. The neighbour walks past smirking. "How's the hay tonight?" The man with the sign mutters something unholy. You watch as a group of children points and giggles. Then one by one they lose interest. Eventually, even the punishment fades into the background hum of village life. This kind of justice, public performative shaming, wasn't about reforming the offender. It was about reinforcing community norms. You were punished so everyone else would behave. And in that sense, maybe it worked. After all, no one's lying about goats tonight. As stars prick the sky and a chill settles over the fields, you settle near a cooking fire behind the tavern. The cook offers you some stew, thick salty, with a questionable bit of meat, and asks what you've seen today. You recount the tithing man, the talking sheep, the shaming sign. He chuckles. You know, justice used to be swift, sword swift. Nowadays we got time for signs and dreams. You sip the stew. It tastes like everything and nothing. Like history itself, confusing, boiled down, and a little too salty. Somewhere in the distance the moon rises a crescent like a slipper in the sky. You wonder who it'll accuse next. You wake before dawn, wrapped in a wool blanket that smells faintly of smoked meat and mildew. A rooster crows late as usual, and a donkey brays like it's auditioning for opera. The cook is already clanging pots behind the tavern, but your journey today takes you farther past the cobbled edge of the village, down a rutted road, and toward the shadow of a looming grey structure on the horizon. A castle, not the majestic fairy tale kind. This one is squat, moody, and bristling with moss-covered stones and questionable architectural decisions. It has the air of a place where nobody ever really smiles, least of all the guards at the gate, who eye you like you're a suspicious onion. But you're not here for a banquet or a tour. You're here for the dungeon, specifically to see how justice operates when it stops pretending to be justice and just becomes control. Inside, everything is cold. Stone walls, stone stairs, stone benches. It's like someone designed it after being personally insulted by warmth. You descend a narrow spiral staircase that smells like damp wool and regret, and find yourself in the underbelly of the keep. A dim corridor stretches ahead, lined with small wooden doors reinforced by iron bands. The jailer greets you with a nod that says, "I have no hobbies." He jingles a ring of keys with flair and gestures for you to follow. The first cell contains a young man accused of poaching deer on the Lord's land. His offense trapping a rabbit, you whisper. On his land, the jailer shrugs. It's here you begin to understand that medieval justice, especially when handled by the nobility, isn't always about morality or fairness. It's about who gets to decide the rules. And once you're on the wrong side of that good luck, in the next cell, a woman sits quietly with her hands folded. She's charged with witchcraft. Her trial delayed until next month or next year. No one seems sure. You ask what her evidence is. Someone's cow got sick, the jailer replies. That's it. That's the whole case. Historians still argue whether witch trials in the earlier medieval period were widespread or isolated. But one thing is certain: accusation alone was often enough to ruin someone's life. Especially if you were a midwife and herbalist, or just generally unpopular. You peer into a darker cell at the far end of the corridor. Inside is nothing. Just a stain and a heavy iron ring bolted to the wall. The jailer doesn't say a word. He just closes that door again. Sometimes you realize medieval justice wasn't about public spectacle or trials with bells and dramatic pigs. Sometimes it just disappeared people. Outside again, you squint in the sun. The castle courtyard is awake now. Servants bustle about. A knight is trying to climb into his armor, while 3 pages argue over whether his left greave goes on first or last. You make your way toward the gallows. They're not in use today, thankfully, but the structure is permanent, well built, almost lovingly maintained. You've seen a lot by now: ducking stools, pillories tithing men half asleep on cider, but nothing as final as this. Here, the punishment doesn't end with bruises or laughter or mild humiliation. Here, it ends with a rope. Executions in the Middle Ages were as much theatre as they were punishment. Meant to deter, to warn, to demonstrate power. And yet they were often public, almost festive. Vendors would sell food. Children would climb shoulders to see. A town crier might shout the condemned's crimes like a carnival barker. One famous account tells of a man who gave such a good speech before his hanging, the crowd tried to intervene. The sheriff waited for the cheering to die down before giving the signal anyway. You sit near the base of the gallows and imagine the weight of that rope, the silence before the drop, the moment when everyone goes from yelling to whispering. It's one thing to read about this stuff. It's another to be here staring at the planks where so many feet have last touched the earth. You glance at a nearby wooden post where edicts are nailed up. One is faded and torn, but the words are clear. By order of the Lord of Greyhearth, any man caught stealing from the harvest shall lose a hand. A bit excessive maybe, unless that man's hand was also writing bad poetry. Not far from the gallows is a platform, raised with rails and a canopy. It's the Lord's bench where noble justice is served during market days. You stick around to see it in action. A merchant is brought forward, accused of cheating his weights. His defense: I was tired. The judge, a nobleman in a hat large enough to have its own postcode, strokes his beard, then fines him 3 silver coins and bans him from the market for a fortnight. You nod. That feels almost reasonable. But then, a peasant is dragged up for disrespecting the forest warden. Apparently, he rolled his eyes when the warden spoke. The Lord sentences him to 1 night in the stocks and a public apology while wearing a pig's snout mask. You try not to laugh. The peasant definitely doesn't succeed. Later, over a simple lunch of barley bread and cheese with a suspicious green tint, you chat with a travelling scribe who's copying court records for posterity. He shows you an entry from last year. A man was fined for whispering during mass. His defense: The sermon was very long. You ask what happens if people can't pay their fines. They go to debtor's prison, he shrugs. Or the stocks. Or the mines if the Lord's feeling entrepreneurial. It's not a system designed to forgive. It's a system designed to remind. Remind you who's in charge. Remind you that justice isn't blind, it just squints politely in the direction of gold. By evening, the castle gates close behind you. You walk along the moat where frogs croak like they're trying to harmonize with ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, you hear bells. Not church bells, warning bells. You quicken your step. In the woods beyond the castle, rumors speak of bandits, outlaws, people who've escaped this version of justice to make their own rules dangerous. Yes, but perhaps more honest than what you've seen today. That's where you're headed next. But for now, you rest beneath an old elm. The stars peek out again, familiar and unconcerned. You wonder how many people have looked up at them with shackles on their wrists and sentences on their lips. The ground is hard, but you sleep. You wake with a sore back and a mouthful of regret that elm tree did not offer orthopedic support. But the stars have faded, birds are back at it like it's a choral competition, and the morning mist clings to the forest like gossip to a noble court. Today, you're leaving the official world of castles and lordly proclamations behind. Because sometimes when justice is a privilege you can't afford or survive, people make their own version in the shadows. You're heading into outlaw territory now. The fringes, the place where legal parchment and royal seals are as useless as a wet shoe. You follow a barely there path deeper into the forest, guided by occasional markings on trees, slashes in bark bundles of sticks, the occasional carved arrow. You're not entirely sure whether you're being invited forward or warned away. By midday, you stumble upon a clearing with smoke curling from a low fire and a handful of ragged figures eating stew from shared wooden bowls. No gallows, no judges, just a circle of people who've slipped off the grid. They see you, one of them, a wiry woman with hair like bramble and eyes like she's already guessed your secrets, nods. Traveler or spy? Neither you answer, just curious. A young man laughs. Well, curiosity got a tanner thrown in the moat last week. But you don't look like a tanner. You're invited to sit. The stew smells better than most noble banquets probably, because it doesn't come with a side of moral superiority. These are the dispossessed. Not criminals by choice, but people made illegal by circumstances. Poachers, debtors, runaway serfs, women escaping forced marriages, even the occasional wrongfully accused witch. Here, justice is a negotiation. A vote. A consensus, sometimes loud, sometimes whispered. There's no pillory, no stocks. But if someone steals from the group, they're cast out. Permanently. The logic is simple, survival depends on trust. You hear stories. One man tells of being sentenced to death for stealing a loaf of bread after a bad harvest, never mind that his children hadn't eaten in 3 days. Another woman says her brother was fined so many times for minor insults, he ended up owing the Lord more than his farm was worth. Historians still argue whether these forest bands were noble outlaws or dangerous criminals, she says with a smirk. I guess it depends who's writing the history. You spend the afternoon helping patch a canvas shelter and listening to the unofficial laws of the forest. Don't lie unless it's funny. Don't take more than you need. If someone brings ale, they get first pick of where to sleep. It's messy, inconsistent, and oddly fair, but don't mistake it for soft. If someone threatens the camp or the balance of the group, they're dealt with swiftly. One man was found hoarding stolen coins. He was tied to a donkey and left at the edge of town with a sign that read, "Greedy pig, do not return." You ask if he ever did. Oh, he tried, someone says. But the donkey remembered the way. Later, after a dinner of fire-charred root vegetables and surprisingly decent mead, the group gathers to hear a dispute. 2 men are arguing over a bow, both claiming it's theirs. They each state their case and then the council votes. A toothless man named Nolly suggests they each shoot at a target. Closest one keeps the bow. Everyone laughs, but it's agreed on. The first man hits the post. The second man misses entirely but insists the sun was in his eyes. It's nighttime. He loses the bow. The community cheers, and someone starts playing a flute made from bone. You recline against a log and realize this is justice too. Not perfect, not enshrined in scrolls or overseen by powdered wigs, but based on something ancient, honor consequence empathy. and occasionally dumb luck. There's a myth told by one of the older members. She insists it's true about a man who created his own court deep in the woods. No punishments, just stories. People would confess, and he'd respond by telling them a tale that mirrored their actions. If they recognized their fault, they changed. If not, they were banished. Historians still debate whether he was real or just a bedtime story for thieves, she says, stirring the fire. You like to think he existed, because honestly, the world could use more judges with bedtime stories. The stars are sharp tonight, bright enough to cast long shadows on the mossy ground. You lie awake wondering how many other outlaw camps hide in forests like this across the kingdom. How many broken systems created them, and whether the so-called criminals in these woods are any worse than the well-dressed lords who hang starving men for snaring a rabbit. You remember the young woman accused of witchcraft, the cobbler blamed by the moon, the man with the eye lied about a goat sign. You wonder how many of them made it to places like this, found some kind of justice among trees and campfires and rules etched in shared experience instead of stone. And then just before sleep takes you, someone sings a low lullaby in a language you don't know. It hums through the trees, settles into your bones, and silences every last thought in your head. Here in the outlaw wilds, justice may not wear robes or carry a gavel, but it sings. You wake to rain gentle, persistent, and cool. It taps the canvas like 1,000 soft fingers coaxing you back to the present. The outlaw camp is already stirring. Boots slap mud. Someone curses at a goat. The forest smells like damp earth and old pine needles. Today you're heading back to civilization, or at least what passes for it. A nearby market town holds its fair this week, and with it comes a strange cocktail of commerce chaos and public punishment. Because what better way to sell cabbages than beside a man being whipped for petty theft? You thank your hosts, receive a hard-boiled egg and a pat on the shoulder, and follow a stream down toward the valley. By midday you arrive. The fair explodes across the village square like a carnival married a flea market. Booths overflow with apples, spices, wool cloaks, fish with too many eyes, and a deeply suspicious meat pie someone assures you is mostly pigeon. Children chase geese. A juggler performs for a distracted chicken. A man tries to sell you a live eel wrapped in ribbon, and in the middle of it all, a wooden platform looms the day's main event. You squeeze into the crowd just as a guard leads a scrawny teen up the steps. His crime insulting a town alderman. His punishment, a dozen lashes. A hush falls as the sentence is carried out, followed by scattered applause. You wince. The pain isn't even the worst part, it's the spectacle. The way strangers cheer gossip, even place bets on how many lashes he'll cry through. But medieval public punishment was always partly about you, the watcher. A social reminder this could be you. Step out of line and the cabbage sellers become your jury. One elderly woman beside you says, "That'll teach him manners." Another adds, "But it was a very funny insult." You learn that punishments at these fairs were often chosen for theatricality. One man last year had to wear a sheep costume for a full day after being caught selling watered-down ale. People still bleat at him when he passes by. There's also the cucking stool, a variant of the ducking stool parked prominently next to the fountain. It's a punishment for scolding women, which you note seems to mean any woman who talked too much or too sharply for someone else's liking. Today it's unused, but a few locals point to it with a kind of nostalgic pride. That's the one what cured Martha from her rants, one says. Another adds, she only rants from inside her house now. You wonder how many injustices were excused by claiming the punishment worked. Wander a little farther, and you reach a quieter part of town, a row of pillories waiting like wooden ghosts. One is occupied a baker caught selling short-weight bread. His head and hands are locked in place, and townsfolk occasionally throw things at him. One child chucks a stale roll so hard it rebounds and hits her mother. It's not all cruelty though. Some passers-by offer him scraps, even kind words. One girl whispers, "My mum says you're a good man," and leaves an apple near his foot. You ask a local about this softer side and he nods. Most folks here don't like the punishments, but they fear what happens if we don't have them. He pauses. Though sometimes I think they fear each other more. Medieval towns were pressure cookers of rumour, religion and rivalry. Public punishment wasn't just about crime, it was a tool to manage collective anxiety. a form of social exorcism. Historians still argue whether these displays were more about justice or theatre, but it's clear they were as much for the crowd as for the condemned. You walk back through the market as the fair winds down. A woman with no teeth tries to sell you authentic relics, pieces of wood she swears came from Noah's Ark, and possibly also her kitchen table. A preacher bellows near the stocks, "Repent and be spared the fire." You hear someone mutter, "Spared the fire maybe, but not the taxes." You find shade near a fountain and observe the people. These are ordinary folk, shoemakers, weavers, brewers, many just trying to survive. Some may cheer at a punishment, but most seem more tired than vengeful. They laugh, they cry, they haggle. Some look over their shoulders as if expecting to be accused next. You realize something. Justice here isn't a concept. It's a spectacle, a rhythm, part of the day's events, like buying turnips or watching a dancing bear. Yes, there's cruelty, but also absurdity. A man sentenced to walk the fair backwards for insulting a priest. Another forced to wear a sign that says, "I lied about my neighbor's goat." You're starting to see the pattern: punishment as performance. And the audience, everyone. Before you leave, you spot a notice nailed to a post. By order of the mayor, anyone found breaking curfew will be fined 1 silver or scrub chamber pots for a fortnight. You chuckle. Then you glance around. No guards, no judges. Just people nodding at the rules, half in fear, half in habit. It's here you start to feel the weight of medieval justice, not as violence, but as presence. It's in every glance, every silence, every decision to speak or not. As the sun lowers, casting gold across the muddy streets, you walk past the baker again. He's been released. He's eating the apple. He nods at you. Didn't cry once, he says. You believe him. You head out of town, under a sky the colour of honey and smoke. The fair is over. The punishment's been dealt. The town exhales, but not for long. Someone will steal a chicken tomorrow, or make a joke at the wrong person's expense, and the platform will creak again, and the people will gather again, and justice, whatever that word means, will put on another show. As night falls and the last lanterns flicker, you reach a quiet stretch of road beyond the village. A breeze stirs the leaves. An owl watches you with one eye open. You think of the man in the stocks, the girl with the apple, the crowd that laughed then turned away, and you wonder, not for the first time, whether justice is best measured, not by the rules we write down, but by how we treat people when they're at their lowest. Tomorrow you head to the church courts. A whole different kind of performance awaits. But for now, you sleep beneath an abandoned hay cart, listening to the wind hum lullabies through the grass. You wake with hay in your ears, the distinct taste of dust in your mouth, and a view of the sky through a gap in the wagon's slats. The early morning air smells like wet stone and warm bread from some distant bakery. Today, justice takes on a new tone, softer, more pious, but no less peculiar. You're headed into the ecclesiastical world now. That's right, church courts, because nothing says eternal salvation like a bishop deciding whether your cow broke a Sabbath law. You trudge toward the cathedral town, where the spires cut through the morning mist like judgment through ambiguity. Bells toll in the distance, not quite mournful, not quite celebratory, just ever present. That's how the church prefers it. As you pass through the gates, a friar holding a damp-looking scroll stops you. "Are you here to confess or complain?" he asks without looking up. Mostly to observe you answer. He sighs. That's what they all say. The cathedral court is held in a modest stone hall behind the church. No torches, no pillories. Just long benches, a wooden cross, and the faint scent of wax and ink. Compared to the noise of the market town, this place feels like a library that disapproves of your shoes. The church courts claim moral jurisdiction, sins, marriage disputes, heresy, and the ever-popular accusation of fornication. They're less about kings and land, more about souls and salvation. In theory, you sit quietly as the first case begins, a woman accused of speaking immodestly to a married man. She's flanked by 2 clergymen who look like they haven't smiled since the Norman conquest. Her punishment, a public confession and a fine of 3 pence. If she couldn't pay, she'd have to fast for 3 market days and wear a linen sash that read, "I misled with words." You suppress a snort, so does she. Historians still argue whether church courts offered mercy or just another version of control. But one thing's clear, they loved a good confession. Next up, a man who failed to attend Mass 3 Sundays in a row. His excuse, he had the pox. The clerk nods solemnly. The Lord understands illness. But you could have sent your wife. My wife had it too, he protests. Your neighbor then also had it. A pause. God moves in mysterious circles, the clerk says. The man is fined 1 chicken and warned not to make a habit of it. The cases keep coming. A butcher who overcharged during Lent. A midwife accused of using herbs not found in scripture. A young couple caught kissing under a fig tree. Some are absurd, some heartbreaking. A boy no older than 12 is brought in for stealing bread during a church feast. His hands shake. He's sentenced to say the Lord's Prayer 50 times and return the loaf, which he already ate. The priest shrugs. Then make him bake a new one. You note how different this feels from the lay courts. There's no blood, no branding. The punishments are about shame, repentance, and whenever possible, property restitution. Of course, when heresy enters the room, the tone shifts. That afternoon, a man is brought in accused of reading banned texts in his home. No specifics are given, just vague whispers of unauthorized doctrine. His face is calm, almost resigned. Unlike other accused, he speaks eloquently, quoting scripture, defending the right to seek personal truth. There's a long pause after he finishes. The bishop overseeing the trial looks like he's chewing on gravel. Recant, he says simply. The man doesn't. He's not sentenced today. The church likes to offer time for reflection, repentance, or quiet disappearance. But there's a chill in the room now, thicker than the incense. You wonder how many such cases ended in quiet exile, and how many didn't. One clerk leans toward you later and whispers, "We're less dramatic than the Crown, but no less final." Then offers you a honey cake. You're told that some people preferred church courts. They were less violent, more procedural. A way to escape a noble's wrath by wrapping your crimes in robes of faith. In fact, a legal loophole called benefit of clergy allowed literate men, and sometimes women, to claim trial by church court, rather than secular one, especially if the crime was minor. All they had to do was read a passage from the Bible. Of course, eventually that became so common, they just had one set verse memorized like a password. You imagine the scene. Did you murder a man? Yes. Can you read Psalm 51? I can. Then go say 3 Hail Marys and avoid eye contact for a while. Historians still debate whether this loophole democratized justice or corrupted it, but for many it was the only way out. As the court adjourns for the day, you join a few scribes in the garden. They complain about ink shortages, and one of them shows you his collection of error-filled transcriptions. He holds up a page and laughs. See here, thou shalt not kill. Sounds delicious, you say. You ask if he believes in the justice of the church. He scratches his beard. Sometimes. We try. But try doesn't always mean fair. You wander the cathedral grounds as evening sets in. Stained glass windows flicker in the candlelight. Somewhere inside, a choir rehearses. The music swells unearthly and beautiful. You sit under a tree and think about all the quiet punishments you saw today. The ones hidden in words and rituals and soft-spoken verdicts. There are no broken bones here, no screams, but the weight is still real. You wonder how many lives were quietly ruined with parchment and whispers, and how many were quietly saved. Because for every unjust judgment, there's a clerk who suggests leniency, a priest who insists on mercy, a rule that catches someone falling. Justice, you realize, wears many masks. Some stern, some sweet, some smelling faintly of incense and beeswax. And none of them are entirely honest. As the stars reappear and the last bell tolls, you curl up in a cloister alcove, warmed by a spare robe someone left behind. The cathedral breathes, stone and silence and soft echoes. You close your eyes to the sound of the choir finishing their final hymn. A lullaby in Latin, a court that judges with prayer and parchment, and a justice system that forgives, just not always you. You wake before dawn, bathed in chill and the scent of candle smoke. Somewhere nearby, a monk coughs himself awake. Your borrowed robe scratches like burlap dipped in sand. But you're oddly grateful for it. Grateful too for the hush of morning, and the way light begins to seep into the cathedral windows like slow spilling gold. Today, justice won't come from a priest or a king. Today, it's handled by the people, sort of. You're heading into the curious realm of trial by jury, or at least the medieval version of it. You've seen judgment pass by sword and sermon, but now you'll meet the jurors, villagers, neighbors, sometimes enemies, all summoned to weigh a person's fate based on little more than memory suspicion and the occasional grudge disguised as civic duty. You leave the cathedral behind and head to the edge of a mid-sized village that's holding a shire court. It's convened only a few times a year, which makes it a bit of an event, half legal assembly, half gossip convention. People bring woven baskets, small children, and the expectation that something juicy will happen. The court gathers near a tree that predates any charter. There's a long wooden bench, a carved pole, and a man holding a very large ledger who introduces himself as the Reeve, an official chosen from the local villagers to help oversee proceedings. He's got the tired smile of someone who's seen one too many goat disputes. Soon, the accused arrives, a woman named Maud, probably in her 30s, accused of stealing eggs from a neighbour's hen house. She insists the hens wandered into her yard. The neighbour insists they were lured with breadcrumbs and whispered promises. A panel of 12 locals is assembled. You watch closely. This isn't the modern idea of a jury, impartial, randomly selected, cloaked in anonymity. These are Maud's neighbours. They know her. They know the neighbour. They know everything, like who flirted with the blacksmith last summer and whose turnip wine causes mild hallucinations. The jury listens. There's no cross-examination, no dramatic lawyer moments, just statements, the occasional outburst, and one guy who keeps sneezing directly onto his tunic. When it's over, the jurors huddle like a pack of indecisive chickens. After several minutes and a low-key argument about precedent and maybe dinner plans, they return. The verdict: not guilty. Mostly because those hens wander everywhere anyway. The Reeve nods, scribbles something in the ledger, and moves on. You might be tempted to scoff: no lawyers, no forensics, no meaningful appeal. But then again, this kind of jury had something the others didn't: local knowledge. They weren't trying to interpret abstract laws. They were trying to keep peace in a village where they'd see the accused every day after the trial, which you admit is its own kind of accountability. Next comes a man named Rafe, accused of cheating during a dice game at the tavern. There's a collective groan, not because he cheated, but because this is the third time he's been tried for it. He always wins, someone mutters. He always claims it's luck, says another. The jury listens. They sigh. Rafe looks like a man trying to look innocent, but also fighting off a hiccup. This time, he's found guilty. His punishment: a fine payable in coin or ale, and a temporary ban from the tavern, enforced, one juror clarifies, by sitting on him if necessary. You think again about the idea of justice as entertainment. These small courts with their feuds and chickens and grudges feel more like community theatre than law. But still, things get settled, disputes are aired, and people seem willing, eager even to participate. One man pulls you aside during a break. "We don't always get it right," he says, "but it's better than some lord doing it for us." Historians still argue whether these local juries were true justice or just crowdsourced control. Some say they empowered ordinary folk. Others say they merely reinforced the status quo. Likely both. Like everything else in this strange era, it's a coin flipped in muddy hands. You return in time to witness a weirder case, a woman accused of being a scold. That delightful old charge again used whenever a woman was too loud, too opinionated, or just plain inconvenient. The jury listens as three neighbours describe her crimes, which seem to consist mostly of yelling at her husband and threatening to turn his stew into something biblical. A few jurors chuckle. One woman on the panel gives a subtle nod of approval. In the end, they compromise. She'll wear a charm collar for a week, a metal ring, not unlike a dog collar with a bell attached. Not painful, just humiliating. You consider how often punishment in this era is more about public embarrassment than physical pain, and how creative folks can get when designing a spectacle. As the court session draws to a close, the Reeve announces upcoming cases and thanks the jurors with all the enthusiasm of someone inviting people to prune a plague tree. You hang back as people drift off. The sun casts long shadows through the trees, and a few remaining jurors chat near a barrel of cider. They seem proud in a worn-out kind of way, like they've kept something important from falling apart. One says we're not kings, but we know when someone's a liar. Another adds, and when someone just needs a nap. You realize this system isn't about legal brilliance, it's about survival, about keeping things more or less fair in a world where the next judgment might be a sword, a sermon, or a swarm of angry villagers. Later, as the village sleeps and the stars prickle the sky, you think about the difference between justice and peace. Maybe sometimes they overlap, but more often, justice here seems to be a process of managing, not perfecting, keeping things tolerable, ensuring grudges don't explode into something worse. You nestle into a hayloft beside the court tree and close your eyes. Somewhere below, a chicken clucks in its sleep-free range and newly exonerated. And justice for tonight is quiet. You wake with straw in your hair and a rooster yelling directly into your eardrum. Justice may be blind, but poultry certainly isn't. Today's chapter in medieval justice skips the jury and the priests leaping headfirst into the absurd and the macabre. Because this time your accuser is the object you wronged. That's right. Welcome to the curious, completely real world of animal trials and object blame. You dust yourself off, and prepare to watch a pig go on trial for murder. The village is already buzzing. People cluster near the town square, where a wooden platform has been set up like a tiny theatre stage. You spot a robed official adjusting his hat and rehearsing lines. Yes lines. Because apparently, theatrical delivery is essential when putting a goat on trial. It sounds like something a bored playwright made up after too much cider, but animal trials were very much real, especially in parts of France and Switzerland between the 13th and 17th centuries. And today you've got front row hay bale seating. The accused is led out a pig snorting and confused wearing a tiny cloth vest for some reason. Her crime fatally biting a child. The charge murder. She is, and you'll want to brace for this, appointed a lawyer, a real one, who bows respectfully and refers to her as the defendant. He argues that she was provoked, that the fence was faulty, and that she cannot be judged by human laws since she does not possess a soul. The prosecution, equally sincere, argues the pig showed intent. Witnesses describe the squeals. One woman sobs dramatically. Historians still argue whether these trials were symbolic rituals or taken at literal face value. Some believe they served to reinforce social order. Even animals could be punished, so no one was above the law. Others say it was theatre grim, sometimes comedic, but always a show of the community's moral code. You lean back and watch as the judge, an older man with eyebrows like hedge brambles, solemnly delivers the verdict guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. You wince. The pig squeals. A few onlookers applaud. Someone sells roasted chestnuts. It's hard to know where morality ends and spectacle begins. As the day unfolds, you're told about other animal trials. A rooster burned for laying an egg. A sign of witchcraft. A group of locusts excommunicated for eating crops, and rats ordered to appear in court, with the defense arguing that the cats on the way there endangered their journey. One trial record claims the rats never showed up and were considered in contempt. You try not to laugh and fail. Your next destination is a quiet hamlet known for a particularly famous object trial, the axe that murdered its owner. You walk past low stone walls, apple trees dropping fruit like careless thoughts, and finally arrive at the village square where the proceedings took place generations ago. Local legend still talks about it. Here's what happened. A man was chopping wood when the axe head flew from its shaft and struck him dead. The villagers were horrified, but instead of blaming faulty craftsmanship or gravity, they blamed the axe. It was confiscated, placed on a table, and tried for homicide. The trial notes kept in a dusty little book in the parish say the axe was declared malevolent and thrown into the river to prevent further harm. You wonder how much of this was genuine fear and how much was the human need to make sense of chaos. To find a villain in an accident, to control the uncontrollable. Historians still debate whether these object trials were legal formalities or spiritual exorcisms wrapped in bureaucracy. Either way, they're proof that medieval people took the idea of intention incredibly seriously, even when it involved iron and wood. You sit for a while near the river, where the axe supposedly met its watery fate. The water babbles with indifference. Maybe it carried the axe to the sea. Maybe it's buried in silt plotting. A group of children runs past playing some version of tag that involves accusing each other of stealing bread. You smile. maybe nothing changes. Later you meet an elderly man who claims to be descended from a long line of beast barristers, those odd souls tasked with defending animals in court. He tells you with a perfectly straight face that pigs are often remorseful goats lie under pressure, and don't get him started on swans. They act innocent, he says, but they remember. You nod slowly, unsure how much is real and how much is cider-fueled bravado. Still, it lingers with you the idea of holding animals and objects to human standards. It's absurd, but also strangely poetic, because if everything in your world can be held accountable, maybe nothing is truly random. Maybe tragedy always has a reason, a trial, a sentence, closure. Even if it's a cow standing awkwardly in a witness box, you wander back to town as twilight stains the sky purple and gold. The court platform has been dismantled, but the energy still buzzes. A small band plays near the tavern, and people dance with the kind of tired joy you only get after a long day of pretending your pig has legal culpability. Tonight you dream of a donkey giving testimony. He's articulate, eloquent, and devastatingly sarcastic. When you wake, you're not entirely sure it was a dream. You roll over feeling the strange comfort of hay again, and you whisper goodnight to the ghosts of all those tried chickens, banished rats, and condemned axes. Justice, you realize, is often just a mirror held up to fear, and sometimes it reflects back a pig in a vest. Morning slides in like a shy servant, quiet, pale, and unexpectedly warm. You wake beneath the same timber beams that hosted last night's laughter and verdicts, and for a few precious seconds, you forget you're deep in the strange machinery of medieval justice. But then you hear it, the rhythmic thwack of wood meeting flesh. Not in fury, but in protocol. Today, punishment isn't about metaphors, morality plays, or judgment by barnyard proxy. Today is about public penalties and the unsettling ritual of watching someone else suffer for the good of the crowd. You step outside and find a small procession moving toward the town square. In the middle walks a young man in rags flanked by two bailiffs with staffs. He's been convicted of petty theft bred predictably and sentenced to the pillory. You follow. The pillory is already set up 2 thick wooden boards clamped together with 3 holes. 1 for the head, 2 for the hands. A splintered immobile spotlight. You hear one child call it the wooden yawn. Clever. The thief is locked in and the crowd gathers. Some cheer, some scowl. One elderly woman sells rotten fruit for throwing. A few folks make jokes while others shake their heads. This, you realize, isn't just punishment, it's theater. Again, the pillory wasn't about pain so much as humiliation, a kind of civic exposure therapy. You steal from us. Now we stare at you, and possibly hit you with a turnip. The man coughs, eyes darting. He's sweating though the morning is cool. A woman yells that he once shortchanged her for goat's milk. Another shouts that he's just hungry, leave him alone. There's no consensus, and there's no privacy, which is of course the point. You learn quickly that punishment in the medieval world wasn't about disappearing someone into a prison cell. It was about making justice visible, raw, noisy, inconvenient. Even the stocks similar to the pillory but seated were less about restraint and more about humiliation. They were often placed near busy roads or marketplaces, so passers-by could mock, scold, or worse. Sometimes people were left in them overnight. Sometimes for days. You think about that. About the ache in the knees, the numbness in the wrists, about needing to relieve yourself in public and the utter collapse of dignity that would cause. Medieval punishment often hinged on shame. Pain could fade, but reputation that stuck. And if shame didn't seem strong enough, there were more creative options. Take, for example, the cucking stool, a wooden chair attached to a long lever, used to dunk scolds, gossips, or suspected witches into freezing rivers repeatedly. 1 splash per insult, perhaps. Bonus soaks for sass. It wasn't just torture, it was choreography. The crowd gathered, the stool was wheeled out, and someone pulled the lever like starting a grim carnival ride. You see one in a museum-like corner of the town hall stored behind glass with a small plaque, cucking stool C, 1390. Used primarily for women accused of scolding or defiance. You arch an eyebrow at that primarily. There's always that one guy. Next door is a device even more theatrical, the shame mask. Iron heavy and grotesquely decorated, each one tailored to fit the crime. A gossiper might wear a mask with an exaggerated tongue. A drunkards might have bottle-shaped horns. Some were fitted with bells, so you'd hear the accused long before you saw them. You imagine wearing one. The heat, the clanging, the sheer weight of being a walking joke. And not for 5 minutes. Sometimes for days. A man nearby tells you a story half true, probably of a baker forced to wear a mask shaped like a loaf after cheating customers on weight. He had to walk the entire market square proclaiming his sin until someone threw flour at him, and the irony became delicious. You laugh, then pause, because the real joke is always heavier. Back in the square, the man in the pillory has been there for nearly an hour. A child asks why he doesn't just run away. The mother answers, because his body might escape, but his name never will. You feel that truth in your gut. Public punishments were society's way of writing your crime into your identity. It wasn't about reform. It wasn't about reintegration. It was about marking you visibly, painfully, performatively. Still, not all public penalties were loud. Some were eerie in their quietness. You hear a tale of a town where a man accused of cowardice was sentenced to wear women's clothes for a month. He wasn't flogged, he wasn't locked up, but he was ridiculed from dawn to dusk, stripped of masculine dignity, in a culture where that meant everything. Historians still argue whether public punishments kept order or fed cruelty. Some say it deterred crime through fear. Others believe it just made crowds thirstier for blood. You begin to suspect it was both. A loop of crime, shame, and entertainment. A town's way of telling itself it had rules, even if those rules changed by mood or weather. And then just as the sun reaches its peak, you witness something unexpected. The man in the pillory, still locked in, still miserable, is offered a cup of water by a small girl. She doesn't throw anything. She doesn't mock. She just hands him the cup and smiles. Her mother scolds her softly. But you see a few other faces shift, softening, thinking. You wonder for the 100th time if justice can exist without cruelty, or if maybe it always needed witnesses to stay alive. As the man is finally released, wrists trembling, he stumbles into the arms of a friend. The crowd suddenly quiet, parts like mist. No cheers, no outrage, just fatigue. Tonight the square is empty again. You sit beneath the pillory's frame, now ghostly in moonlight. The wood is still warm from hours of sun and shame. You rest your head against the post and close your eyes. Justice is heavy, public justice heavier still. But somewhere inside the spectacle there might be mercy. One girl with a cup of water, one neighbor who looks you in the eye and sees a person, not a label. You hope that's enough. You wake to the sound of bells, slow, measured, and solemn. Not the kind that call you to prayer or market, but the kind that announce judgment. You rise, stretch your aching legs, and follow the peal toward the source, a stone building just outside the village, low and thick-walled with iron-barred windows and an air of authority. This is no pillory, no stage show punishment. This is a real medieval prison, and it's far stranger than you think. Inside, the smell hits first damp straw, sweat mold, and something else you can't quite name, but definitely don't want to. The floor is packed earth, the walls weep moisture, and everything is either chain-stained or rusted. A jailer, as bored as he is barefoot, nods at you and unlocks the inner chamber. You descend. This is the underworld of medieval justice. Dark, cramped, and wildly inconsistent. Because while we picture dungeons as standard punishment, here's the twist. Imprisonment wasn't usually the sentence, it was just the waiting room. You look around. Prisoners slouch against walls. Some mumble. One man sings quietly to himself. Another woman carves notches into the stone beside her. Day's victims' recipes. Most of them aren't convicted criminals. They're accused awaiting trial, or more accurately waiting to be told when their trial might eventually happen. You're told of cases where someone waited years for a verdict. One man died of old age before the court summoned him. The crime allegedly stealing 2 chickens. The irony, he was a vegetarian. Prison in this time wasn't about reform. It wasn't about rehabilitation. It was logistics and chaos. There were few standards. If you were rich, you might bribe your way into a comfortable cell, a term which meant not directly beneath the latrine. You might even be allowed visitors' furniture or to wear shoes. Poorer inmates, not so lucky. They shared cramped spaces, slept upright, and sometimes starved if their families couldn't bring food. Yes, really, prisons often didn't feed you. That was your family's problem. Or maybe the church's. Or nobody's. You meet a young man named Willem who's been here 3 months for allegedly insulting a lord's wife. He says he was just commenting on her hat. You ask if it was a nice hat. It was a very nice hat, he replies bitterly. Shame about her ears. You decide not to ask more. In another corner, 2 women sit beside each other. They don't speak. One holds a tiny pouch coins maybe, or charms. The other is barefoot, but her feet are wrapped in cloth. You hear later they were accused of consorting with spirits during a storm. Their trial is next month, or next year. Historians still argue whether medieval prisons were meant to isolate or humiliate. Some say they were temporary holding tanks. Others claim they became de facto punishments due to broken court systems and endless delays. Both seem true, because no matter the original intention, once someone was locked away and forgotten, the outcome was the same decay. You tore one cell known locally as the cradle, not for its comfort but because of the rats. They like to snuggle someone jokes. There's also the churn named for how your stomach reacts to the smell, and the choir, which seems sweet until you learn it's where the jailer stored the more vocal prisoners. Still, amidst the filth and forgotten, there are flashes of weird humanity. A priest visits once a week, dropping off food and offering absolution. No one accepts either. A boy slips a bundle of herbs through the bars for his father. He whispers, "Mama says these help with dreams." You notice it's lavender and thyme. You smile. You pass a cell with a wall full of scratched drawings, figures, animals, even what looks like a castle. The artist, a woman jailed for forgery. Turns out she was so good at replicating seals that nobles paid her to fake letters. When she finally got caught, she was given 3 months. She's on month 8. You meet her. She's sharp-witty and entirely unrepentant. "I didn't lie," she says. "I just wrote what they wanted to believe." You wonder if that's what history always is. Later, you're shown a punishment reserved for unruly or particularly infamous inmates, the iron cage. This wasn't a cell. It was more like a suspended trap. Iron bars just big enough to stand, but not sit. Hung in a public place. You were locked inside, exposed to weatherbirds and very opinionated townsfolk. Sometimes for hours, sometimes days. There's an old one rusting behind the jail. You climb in briefly out of morbid curiosity. It's awful, restricting. And the sound, the wind humming through the bars like a cruel lullaby, sticks in your bones. You can't imagine staying in it all night, but some did. Even more bizarre, occasionally the cage was used after death to display a corpse as a warning. This is what happens, the town would say, when you challenge the law. Justice wasn't just visible, it was displayed like rotten fruit. Look, smell, remember. And in case you thought medieval imprisonment couldn't get darker, consider this. Sometimes the jailer himself had to pay to keep prisoners. Or he was paid by the prisoner's family to provide food and warmth, which meant poorer inmates were neglected, or beaten, or sold for labor. Justice by subscription model. The deluxe package includes soup and straw. Historians still debate whether these practices were systemic cruelty or simply the byproduct of limited resources and chaotic governance. Either way, the outcome was the same, a cycle of neglect and forgetting. You leave the prison with a sore back and a stomach that's tied itself in a quiet knot. You don't want to look back, but you do. And there's Willem, still in the same corner, still muttering about hats. Outside, the air tastes like soap and grass. You never noticed how clean sunlight smells until now. You walk until the sound of bells fades and the birds take over. You sit near a stream and run your fingers through the water, and for the first time all day, you feel something resembling peace. It's strange to think prisons were once more temporary holding pens than long-term punishments, and stranger still to realize that for many temporary became eternal. Lives paused, names lost, bodies forgotten. You lie down and close your eyes. Tonight, you'll dream of iron cages and forged letters of whispering walls and drawings in stone. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream of Willem getting out, buying a better hat, and telling the story right this time. You rise with a shiver and a thought that maybe you've escaped the worst of it until you see the crowd gathering near the edge of town. Not a market day, not a feast, not another morbid comedy performance. This is something different. You walk drawn in by the murmurs, the anxious fidgeting of hands, and that peculiar weight in the air like a storm about to speak. When you reach the gathering, you see it a raised wooden scaffold, freshly built, solid beams, a rope hanging. Today is an execution day. You probably won't survive this one either, at least not emotionally. The condemned is already there, a man in his 30s, calm-faced, wearing clothes too clean for someone about to die. His name, you learn in whispers, is Thomas. A thief turned preacher turned thief again. Allegedly. No one's quite sure. The record is a mess, the evidence thinner than soup made from promises. Still, he's been sentenced, the method hanging. You're surprised. No burning, no breaking wheel, just a rope. Well, yes, because despite all the elaborate ways medieval folks could imagine inflicting pain, hanging was actually one of the most common execution methods, especially for men convicted of theft, treason, or simply being inconvenient. Simple, cheap, efficient. Thomas doesn't resist. He's walked the line between legend and outlaw too long to beg now. The executioner, a burly man with an apron and eyes like old wood, nods at him. They share a look, and it's not hatred. It's routine. You're told that the town executioner also works as a butcher. There's symbolism in that, but you don't unpack it yet. The crowd presses forward, hungry for the climax. Some came for justice, some for spectacle. A few came for closure, and a few came just because this is what happens on Thursday afternoons. Thomas climbs the scaffold. His steps are slow, but not theatrical, just deliberate. The rope is placed around his neck, adjusted, tugged once. The priest reads something. No one listens. A drumroll real or imagined, and then he falls. It's over in seconds. Maybe too fast for the crowd who expected more drama. Maybe too slow for Thomas, who probably dreamed of a swifter goodbye. You don't clap. You don't cry. You just stand there, feeling the silence that always follows something irreversible. But hanging wasn't the only execution method. Oh no. You're about to be dragged into the darker branches of the medieval justice tree. Take beheading, for instance. Reserved for nobles because apparently dignity is severed along with the neck. If you had the right blood, you got a clean death with a sword or axe. If you were really lucky, the executioner was skilled. If not well, swings could miss. Some nobles had to endure 2, 3, even 4 attempts before their head gave up. Anne Boleyn famously requested a French swordsman more precise than an English axe. She was onto something. Then there was burning at the stake, the punishment of choice for heretics, witches, and people who annoyed the wrong bishop. You've heard of it, seen the dramatizations, but what you probably didn't realize is that the fire was often designed to be slow. Wet wood, green logs, a burn that cooked more than it incinerated. People didn't always die from the flames. Sometimes they suffocated in the smoke first. If they were lucky, you learn about a woman named Marjorie accused of heresy for preaching in public. She begged not for mercy, but for dry kindling. She got neither. Historians still argue whether executions like these were about eliminating threats or reinforcing authority. Were they justice or theatre with consequences? You suspect the answer's in the smell of scorched earth. Even more brutal, the breaking wheel. Sometimes called the Catherine wheel, this device involved binding the condemned to a large cartwheel, then systematically shattering their limbs with a hammer or iron bar. Sometimes they were left on display afterward, bodies bent like broken sculptures, a warning for miles around. Not common, but common enough to haunt your dreams. Then there's drawing and quartering, that famously horrific English specialty reserved for high treason. The full process. First, the traitor is dragged on a wooden hurdle through the streets, face scraping gravel, body bouncing. Then they're hanged briefly until near death. Then cut down, disemboweled alive with their entrails burned before their eyes. Finally, they're beheaded and chopped into 4 parts each, sent to different corners of the kingdom, as proof that rebellion has consequences. You sit down, because even imagining it too vividly is enough to make your heart skitter like a dropped apple. Still, even in this grim landscape, there are flickers of humanity. Sometimes a relative would bribe the executioner for a quicker death, a hidden knife, a stronger rope, a better aim. Sometimes the crowd would demand mercy and surprisingly be heard. Executioners weren't immune to shame either. You meet one later off duty, sharpening a blade outside his hut. He tells you his grandfather executed 39 men and 1 woman. He himself is only at 11. Don't plan to catch up, he says, and chuckles, like that's just a normal statement. He explains the difference between a clean cut and a messy one, between justice and vengeance. Sometimes he says the crowd wants pain. Sometimes they just want it over with. You ask if he sleeps well. Most nights, he says, I just tell myself I'm the full stop at the end of someone else's sentence. That stays with you, because it's easy to forget that these deaths weren't always about law. They were about message, about spectacle, about making an example so vivid, so visceral, that no one dared repeat the offense. You wander to the town's edge, where a single gallows stands silhouetted against the sky. You touch the wood. It's smooth in places, worn by weather, or hands, or fear. You try to imagine what it was like to be sentenced, to walk that last walk, to hear your name read aloud with finality, to know that your last breath would be taken in front of a crowd that might cheer, or might yawn. You try not to picture Thomas's face, but it comes anyway. Tonight, you return to your bed uneasy. You leave the window open, hoping the night breeze might carry away the weight of what you've seen. And before sleep takes you, one question lingers. If punishment becomes performance, who's really being judged? You wake slowly, hoping maybe you've left executions behind. But no, today's walk takes you down a narrower lane past gardens and simple cottages toward a place far more subtle in its cruelty. No ropes, no flames, no wheels or cages. Just a low building made of timber and wattle tucked behind a parish church. Inside a chair, a set of scales, and a room that smells like bruised herbs and old sweat. Today you step into the bizarre, often humiliating world of medieval punishments for moral crimes, the petty, the personal, the downright awkward. Your guide for the day is a grey-haired clerk who has seen more nosebleeds than sermons. He doesn't look up from his scrolls as you enter. You're here to watch, not confess, he mutters. You nod, he shrugs. Then stand over there. You'll want a good view. First up, a woman named Alice, accused of gossip. Her neighbor claims she started a rumor that the local baker was using sawdust in his bread. The baker denies it. Alice denies starting it, but someone has to pay. Her sentence, the scold's bridle. Also called the branks, it's a metal cage placed over the head with a flat iron gag that presses down on the tongue. It makes speech impossible and drooling inevitable. Alice glares as they fit the contraption to her face. The crowd giggles. A child points. She's walked through the village unable to speak, cheeks burning, jaw clamped shut. Her only crime, talking too much. You follow the procession. She stumbles once but rights herself. The clerk mutters that the bridle doesn't actually hurt unless you talk. Then it scrapes, bleeds, teaches silence. You wonder if it was ever used on the men who shouted false miracles in the square. Spoiler, probably not. Next, a couple red-faced and sullen dragged forward for public punishment after a marital spat turned violent. The solution, the cucking stool. No, not ducking though, that's related. The cucking stool is a chair sometimes mounted on wheels, sometimes suspended over water, traditionally used to shame quarrelsome women, but occasionally applied to men for disorderly conduct. The couple is bound to the chair back to back. They're paraded through town, insulted by spectators, then dunked in a nearby pond for cooling off. It's freezing muddy and very public. He screams first, she laughs, then coughs. Justice apparently comes with water damage. Later, you're shown the pillory, that famous wooden frame with holes for head and hands. But what you didn't realize is how much worse it was than it looks. For hours, sometimes days, you stood exposed. No food, no water, arms slowly going numb. And if the crime was well known, townsfolk might throw things. Rotten vegetables if you were lucky. Stones, dung, or worse if you weren't. One man tells you of a merchant who lost an eye in the pillory. His crime, selling underweight wool. Historians still debate whether public humiliation was effective deterrence or just medieval entertainment disguised as morality enforcement. Was it punishment or participation sport? Either way it worked, people remembered, and not just the condemned. You hear about a unique punishment called shame parading. Convicted of adultery, you might be made to march through town in your undergarments carrying a sign describing your sin. One man was forced to wear a hood covered in feathers, with a placard that read, "I strayed, Now I stray alone." The town laughed. His wife moved 2 villages away. You learn of a case where a baker, yes, maybe that baker was caught watering his ale. Instead of jail, he was forced to sit outside his shop in a barrel labelled, "A brewer of false cheer." The children called it the ale bath. You wonder if people ever faked crimes just to get revenge via humiliation. Historians suspect it happened more than records admit. Back inside, the clerk shows you a tattered book of punishments, fines for swearing in church, for walking barefoot on Sunday, for wearing fabric above your station. A woman once paid in eggs for the crime of too much red. You ask what that means. He shrugs. She looked like trouble. Not all was public shaming, though. Sometimes the church handed down quiet penance, a year of silent prayer, a month of wearing sackcloth, or worst of all, being made to sit in the front pew every Sunday with a sign that read, "Sinner." A literal walk of shame, weekly. Still, the weirdest one you see is trial by bread. Yes, you heard that right. When clergy were accused of crimes, they were sometimes subjected to a bizarre ritual. They had to eat a piece of dry bread while swearing innocence. If they choked or coughed, they were guilty. If they swallowed cleanly, God had apparently cleared them. It's funny, until you remember how nerve-wracking that must have been. Imagine standing there, a room full of watchers, dust-dry bread in your hand, praying your throat doesn't betray you. Your mouth's dry just thinking about it. One priest, you learn, was cleared by the bread test, then excommunicated 6 months later when someone found letters in his study. Turns out divine judgment sometimes needs follow-up paperwork. There's also the bizarre punishment of hearth exile, being banished from your own home, often over inheritance or property disputes. Imagine being forced to sleep outside your own cottage, watching your rival eat your soup. Some got creative with justice. In a fishing village, a man who overcharged his neighbors for salted herring was sentenced to give away fish for free, in song every day for a week, standing on a barrel, wearing a paper crown that read, "Fish fool." Justice wasn't always about pain. Sometimes it was about laughter, sharp-pointed, unforgettable laughter. You start to see the pattern. In a world where prisons were few and resources scarcer, the most accessible form of punishment was shame, and it stuck. A man who had been pilloried once often found himself out of work. A woman forced to wear the bridle might never marry. Public memory was long and petty, but there were exceptions. One couple sentenced to carry dead animals through the streets as penance for stealing poultry later opened a butcher's stall. People loved their honesty. The irony, they never stole again. They didn't have to. You leave the town square as dusk falls. The pillory is empty. The bridle sits on a hook. The clerk returns to his scrolls. But in your mind you carry them, all: the soaked couple, the feathered adulterer, the mute woman in steel. Their names may fade, but their stories cling like damp straw. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice wonders, would modern shame hold up under medieval standards? Would you? Don't worry, you don't have to answer that. Not tonight. Just rest. You've survived another strange, uncomfortable chapter. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow you might find something even stranger. By now you're starting to expect weirdness. A medieval justice never disappoints. You've seen executions, endured bridal gags and pillories, and watched a baker bathe in ale. But today, things take an even stranger turn. Because this morning a town crier announces the start of something truly theatrical. A trial by combat. Yes, actual fighting. Not knights in shining armor jousting for glory, no. This is far more awkward and far more revealing. You arrive at a cleared patch of earth behind the guild hall, where a ring has been marked out in chalk and rope. A small crowd gathers, buzzing with anticipation. 2 people are about to settle a legal dispute the only way the court will allow, by beating the truth out of each other. Trial by combat wasn't as common as you might think, but it was real. Especially in certain parts of Europe where formal legal systems were still entangled with ideas of divine intervention. The logic was this: if both parties claimed innocence or righteousness, and there was no way to determine the truth, they'd fight. And God would reveal the winner by ensuring justice prevailed. Simple right. You're introduced to the combatants, one man middle-aged, wiry, wearing a grim expression and a tunic stained with goat hair. and one woman younger, fire-eyed, wrapped in layers like she's ready to do laundry in a blizzard. The issue: a land dispute. Her family says the property was stolen. His family claims he inherited it, fair and square. The judge, exasperated after months of hearings, ordered a duel. You might think this is uneven until you learn that in many recorded cases, where a man and woman fought, the man was required to fight with one arm tied behind his back, and sometimes even while standing in a pit up to his waist. Yes, a literal dirt pit, with a staff. While the woman circled from above, free to swing a sack filled with rocks, and here it is right in front of you. The man climbs into the pit. He grips a club with his free hand. The woman circles the edge, sack in hand. They nod to the judge. The duel begins. It's clumsy, brutal, and oddly quiet. She strikes first, catching his shoulder. He grunts, twists, and nearly loses his balance. They exchange blows for what feels like hours. Eventually he slips. She pins him with the sack, winded and triumphant. The judge declares her the winner. She keeps the land. The crowd applauds, not wildly, but with a kind of grim satisfaction. Justice, at least by divine smackdown, has been served. Historians still argue whether trial by combat was a sincere belief in God's hand, or just a convenient way to end messy disputes. Some records suggest judges pushed combat when evidence was too thin, or both parties equally insufferable. The strangest part, sometimes the loser didn't even die. They just lost the case. Other times it was fatal, and then you learn about animal trials. No, that wasn't a typo. In several parts of medieval Europe, animals, particularly pigs, could be tried for crimes. Actual court cases, witnesses, judges, legal representation. You think you're dreaming, but no. Your next stop is a small chapel converted into a courtroom for special circumstances. A clerk, barely hiding a smirk, hands you a transcript. Case A: pig on trial for killing a child. Charge manslaughter. Defense: the pig's owner arguing the animal acted out of instinct. Verdict: guilty. Sentence: execution by hanging. You stare. The clerk shrugs. Pigs were often around children. Sometimes things went bad. People needed someone or something to blame. In another case, a group of rats was summoned to court for stealing grain. When they didn't show up, the lawyer argued they couldn't attend because of the danger posed by neighborhood cats. No, seriously, the judge accepted the argument and delayed the trial. You wonder if the rats celebrated. It wasn't just pigs and rats. Horses, dogs, even insects. Some accused of blasphemy, others of theft or destruction. The church sometimes held excommunication ceremonies for weevils, complete with solemn declarations and threats of eternal banishment. Scholars still debate whether these trials were sincere expressions of a worldview where animals and humans shared moral space, or elaborate rituals designed to give people emotional closure. Either way, you're not going to look at barnyards the same again. Next, you're invited to observe ordeals by firewater and combat, each a kind of divine test to determine innocence. In one instance, a woman accused of theft is told to carry a red-hot iron bar across a specific distance. Her hands are then bound and sealed for 3 days. If they heal cleanly, she's innocent. If they fester, guilty. You see the scars on an older man's palms. He passed the ordeal 20 years ago, but his hands haven't held a plough since. There's the ordeal of cold water, another divine logic trick. The accused is tied and lowered into a river. If they float, they're guilty, rejected by the water, a symbol of divine purity. If they sink, they're innocent, but probably unconscious or drowned. Helpful. This test was often used in witch trials. It had the grim paradox of requiring survival to prove innocence, but survival also counted against you. Catch-22 Medieval Edition. You learn of a local healer accused of witchcraft after curing a noble's daughter with beetroot and prayer. They threw her into the river. She floated. She was hanged the next day. The beetroot, by the way, worked. The girl lived, but the healer didn't. The clerk tells you that as science and secular law advanced, these ordeals faded, but not quickly. People cling to spectacle, he says, and fear always needs a costume. Before you leave, he hands you a small wooden token, a favor from the court, he says, for surviving the strangest bits. It's carved with a rat. You laugh. He doesn't. You walk back through the village with the image of dueling landowners and solemn pigs floating in your head. Was any of it fair? Or was it simply the best they could do with what they believed? You're not sure, but you do know this. Justice in the Middle Ages wore many masks, some noble, some laughable, some soaked in fear, some carved from ritual. And as strange as it all seems, you can't help wondering if future people watched our world with the same sleepy distance, what parts would they find absurd? You reach your room just as the stars begin to blink overhead. No trials tonight, no duels, no dancing rats in little hats. Just dreams, hopefully. You wake in the pre-dawn, quiet brain still fogged from yesterday's visions, sack-swinging duelists, accused pigs, and trial by bread. You might be thinking, surely it can't get any more bizarre. But you'd be wrong, because today you wander into the dusty archives of medieval law, where things get meta punishments, not just for crime, but for who you were, what you wore, and how you dared to behave. This is the world of sumptuary laws and class enforcement justice dressed up in linen wool and a suspicious amount of velvet. You duck into the long hall of the guild registrar. At first glance, it looks more like a fabric shop than a courthouse. Rolls of cloth hang along the walls. Swatches of purple gold-threaded trims, boots with curled toes, stacked like pastries. But this isn't a tailor's paradise, it's a list of forbidden fashion. Because in the medieval mind, what you wore said everything about who you were. Clothes were social contracts, and breaking those contracts, a punishable offense. Take that deep crimson tunic you're admiring. Looks good, right? Soft, expensive, just flashy enough. Too bad you're a peasant. That shade of red is reserved for merchants and clergy. Wear it without the proper birth certificate, and you'll find yourself fined, or worse, shaved bald, and march through town, holding your illicit garment aloft like a scarlet letter with sleeves. Sumptuary laws were designed to keep people in their place. Literally. They regulated everything from hat feathers to shoe length. The logic too much luxury among the lower classes led to pride deception or even social climbing that most dreaded medieval sin. In 1363, England passed a law stating that no one under the rank of knight could wear cloth of gold or silver or furs other than lamb or rabbit. And don't even look at velvet unless you own land. You hear about a man who wore a silver-threaded belt to a feast he wasn't invited to. He claimed it was a gift. The court claimed he was posing as a gentleman. His punishment? He had to serve at the feast barefoot, wearing a rope for a belt. Historians still argue whether these laws were ever enforceable or just wishful thinking from nervous nobility, trying to keep up appearances while the rising merchant class threatened to blur the lines. One scholar wrote that sumptuary laws were as effective as a cheesecloth in a rainstorm. Still, towns enforced them. Tailors had to register certain fabrics. Markets were monitored, and anonymous complaints flew like pigeons. Did you see that apprentice in silk was enough to trigger a visit from the town reeve? It wasn't just fashion either. Social behavior was regulated too, especially for women. Laugh too loud, suspicious. Sit in the tavern too long, immoral. Own too many books, witch. One record tells of a widow fined for walking with unnecessary boldness. Another was banned from church for 6 months after being seen in public with 2 different hats in a week. The horror. You find a ledger of lifestyle infractions, dancing in daylight, singing bawdy songs near the well-wearing shoes that slapped audibly against the cobble, and the ever-mysterious, excessive smiling. Who knew joy could be illegal? And then there's alewife laws punishments specifically aimed at women who brewed and sold beer, usually out of their homes. It was a legitimate trade often passed from mother to daughter. But let the batch go sour or short a customer on phone, you're in trouble. One alewife was forced to stand in the village square, wearing a tankard on her head and a sign reading, "False froth." You have to admit that one's kind of clever. Then comes the anti-idleness statutes laws, designed to keep people visibly busy. Loitering crime, daydreaming on church steps, suspicious, napping during harvest season, grounds for corporal punishment. There's even a bizarre rule in one French village that declared all men must appear to be at labour if the sun is above the hill. So townsfolk carried tools just to look busy. You picture it, a guy in church clutching a rake, whispering, "Just covering my shift." Of course, none of this applied to the elite. A nobleman could wear 16 colors at once, ride through town with falcons and jewels, and no one would blink. But let a tanner's son wear a hat with a brooch, and suddenly it's anarchy. You see the resentment brewing. This is where public punishments met performance, the spectacle of making examples out of social transgressors. It wasn't about deterring crime, it was about preserving the pyramid. One infamous case involves a blacksmith who threw a lavish wedding for his daughter music roast goose dancers. Too lavish, according to the mayor. The punishment, he was fined, then forced to host a corrected celebration. No music, one meat dish, and he had to personally greet each guest with the words, "I am merry, but humbly so." He left town shortly after. You walk through a courtyard now, known for its rope day rituals, a ceremony where those caught with excessive ambition, yes, that's the actual charge, were made to parade with a length of rope over one shoulder. A symbol of restraint, a warning to dream smaller. Justice, it seems, was also fashion police behavior monitor and dream snuffer. The church chimed in too. Clergy could issue penance for vanity sins, owning more than 3 belts, braiding hair to tempt, or using exotic oils. Some penance involved public washing rituals, where the accused had to clean their own shoes in holy water while reciting psalms. It's easy to laugh, but beneath the absurdity is a truth. These were systems of control, carefully crafted to reinforce who was important and who was not. Still, the cracks were already forming. By the late 14th century, merchants had more money than many nobles. Tailors found ways to smuggle fancy fabric into plain clothes. Sumptuary laws were revised, reworded, and eventually mostly ignored. But not before they left behind a trail of stories of peasants who dared to sparkle widows, who smiled too freely, alewives who foamed too much, and maybe some who faked punishment for social clout. Yes, I was fined for my hat. Jealous. You leave the registrar with a newfound respect for anyone who wore beige on purpose. Outside, the sun hangs low and golden, and for a moment everything looks like velvet. The clothes, the laws, the people trying to move one rung higher, it's all a pageant. Carefully staged, terribly enforced, endlessly judged. And now it's over, for today anyway. You head back, the sound of your own shoes slapping just a little too loudly on the stones. Careful, someone might report that.
The evening settles softly over the rooftops, casting long shadows across the thatched inns and crooked chimneys. You're walking slower now. Not because you're tired, though you are, but because some part of you wants to stretch this out. Savor the last bits of the strange, brilliant, completely baffling medieval justice tour. The road beneath your feet gives a slight crunch. Gravel crumbs of ancient laws. Who can tell? You turn a corner and find yourself outside a crumbling tower. More ruin than fortress, its stone walls dappled with moss and pigeon residue. This, they say, was once a courtroom, a royal hall of justice. But today, it's mostly home to squirrels. Still, a local historian waits for you at the door, bright-eyed, wind-chapped, and holding a lantern like someone from a ghost tour who never clocked out. He offers to show you the records of royal clemency, those rare moments when mercy reared its sleepy head in the otherwise iron-fisted medieval world. Turns out not all justice was punishment. Sometimes it was theater. Sometimes it was strategy. You follow him inside. The room smells like wax and wet parchment. The shelves are lined with scrolls, sealed letters, and oddly shaped wax figurines. Don't ask. He pulls out a ledger labeled simply Forgiveness. You flip through entries. A thief who stole grain from a noble's storehouse pardoned after composing a hymn that made the bishop cry. A man who falsely confessed to killing his own brother released after it was discovered the victim had actually just run off with a barmaid named Maud. A woman sentenced to lashings for speaking against the crown, sentence commuted after she embroidered a truly stunning depiction of the Virgin Mary on the judge's vestments. Justice, it seems, was sometimes bought bartered or beautified. There's even a case of a cow pardoned posthumously. No explanation. No footnotes. Just let it be known this beast was blameless. You silently salute the cow. Historians still argue whether these were signs of evolving justice or just noble whims. Mercy as PR, kindness as leverage. But a pardon, even one wrapped in politics, could change lives. And sometimes those gestures, however inconsistent, broke the bleak rhythm of iron law with a glimmer of humanity. The historian shows you another odd artifact, a mercy bell, that once hung outside a town hall. Accused persons could ring it to request clemency before judgment. It didn't always work, but sometimes it bought them a second chance, or at least a moment of pause before things turned ugly. You ask if it still rings. He shrugs. Only if you believe in echoes. You chuckle, sleepy, thoughtful. The lantern flickers. You leave the tower behind and begin your last walk through town. Past the stocks, past the ducking stool, past the red door where the town clerk once hid banned books about reforming punishment with compassion. You've seen a lot: bread judges, duel, pits, animal trials, fashion, fines, and mercy bells. But as you head toward the edge of the village, one final realization unfolds slowly in your mind. None of this was ever just about justice. It was about fear, power, belonging, belief. It was about creating order in a chaotic world, sometimes with wisdom, often with wild guesses. And though the punishments were harsh, the methods absurd, you begin to understand why they clung to them. Because not having justice, even a deeply flawed one, was more frightening. So they made it up as they went, and painted it with ritual robes and rotting cheese tests. And you survived it all. No nose leeches, no river dunkings, no public shaming for excessive shoelace enthusiasm. Just you and a strange sense of calm. You settle into a quiet field just beyond the last cottage. The stars blink overhead, soft, detached, as if even they've been watching this bizarre little story unfold. You close your eyes. The wind rustles like distant parchment. The earth feels firm beneath you, steady like a judge's gavel. And for a moment, you wonder what stories people will whisper about our era centuries from now. The ones that make them chuckle or shake their heads. The rituals that seem alien. The punishments that seem petty. The rules that make no sense when the world finally moves on. Maybe someday someone will lie in bed listening to a story about us, and they'll think, you probably wouldn't survive that either. So now the torches dim. The courtroom doors creak closed, and the gavel, if there ever was one, falls silent. The cold stone walls of those medieval halls crumble gently in your memory, softening into mist. Let the noise of those judgments fade, each absurd trial dissolving into the quiet hush of sleep. No more sack duels. No more cheese-eating innocence tests. No more wondering whether your tunic's color might offend a monarch you've never met. It's just you now, your breath steady, your limbs softening. Let each silly, strange image drift further away. The pig in the courtroom. The man standing waist-deep in a pit. The weevils dodging trial. Each of them stepping back like fading actors after the play. Because justice may be complicated, strange, and at times hilariously broken. But here in this moment, there is only stillness. No trials, no rules, just rest. Let the soft hum of the night carry you deeper, your thoughts quieting like a courtroom after the last candle goes out. And if tomorrow brings its own trials, let them wait. For now, your sentence is peace. Your verdict, sleep, end of script, sweet dreams.